Genesis 12:10 through 13:18. We'll read the first part of this story and then the second part of this story later. So here we go. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife, Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister?" So they took her to be my wife. "Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. It's the first part of our story. And it begins in verse 10. There was a famine in the land. It's an important detail here. And, right, kind of as a result, Abraham went down to Egypt. Remember that he had been in Negev to live there for a while. This phrase in the Hebrew is our word for sojourn, and a big part of why we're going to look at Abram for what it means to be a sojourner. He went down to Egypt to live there for a while. It means not permanently, just as long as this famine is going on, because the famine was severe. If it was just a normal famine, he would have stayed, but this one was severe, so he had to go. So let's go back down all the way to our, where is it? There it is. Our storyline arc, and obviously there's kind of two humps in here. That's because there's two stories that have a similar message. They build on one another. We'll start the first one. So in verse 10, there is a famine, right? And just from that one little lesson, or one little point, we can learn that, things are not perfect in the promised land. Even though Abram is in the promised land, things are not perfect. There is a famine going on. And so there's this choice to leave and go down to Egypt. And then verse 11, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' They will try to kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." So just break this down. He knows, one, what a beautiful woman Sarai is. And you might be thinking, Sarai has got to be in her 60s or 70s at this point. How beautiful could she be? If people were living to 200 years or even 150 years old, this would make Sarai kind of middle-aged at this point in time. So we might assume that she's still fairly beautiful. And number two, if it's anything like it is today and women had their faces covered, then maybe it was mainly her eyes that draw beauty. But whatever the case may be, she was beautiful. And while that's weird for us today, certainly not weird in the story. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife," right? Now, this woman belongs to another man. And his assumption is then, right, because this man has a beautiful wife and he's just a sojourner among us, they will kill me, but will let you live. And then obviously he's going to be taken. And now if you're thinking, this isn't even, who would do this? Don't forget that David did this, right? David took Bathsheba from Uriah. So here's his solution. Verse 13, "Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared for you. So that I will be," here's one, "treated well for your sake." Oh man. Treated well for your sake. I just got to point that out right now, right? He's like, if I get treated well, it'll be good for you. This is good for you. And my life will be spared because of you. So he's telling Sarai, to just say that you're my sister. Don't say that you're my wife for your own sake. And my life will be spared. That's 2. And then at the end, he adds this because of you, 3, meaning that you've saved my life. So this is a manipulation. Sarai, we don't see what she has to say about it. My guess is that she wasn't too happy about it. And as for the family line, you have to remember that his father had another family, and that Sarai was Abram's half-sister. His sister by another woman. And therefore, it's not a falsehood, it's just not the full truth. Because the full truth is that Abram is going to be, Abram is her husband. So this is the first paragraph. Let's go back down to the bottom. And so there's a famine, and then kind of verses, and actually that's probably the wrong spot. Let's go up here. Verse 11. In Egypt, Sarai will, or we should put may be taken. Right? So there's this that's adding suspense to what we're dealing with here. And then verses 12 through 13, we get Abram's, I'm going to move that up a little bit, give ourselves some space. Verses 12 through 13, we get kind of Abram's plot. Okay? And the next part, verse 14, when Abraham came to Egypt, so now we're going to unfold the plan, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman, right? So this is exactly what he said would happen in verse 12. 15, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. Like, boom, you're now my wife, right? He treated Abram well for her sake. So this line up here, I will be treated well for your sake. That comes true. And what does that look like? Abram acquires sheep, cattle, male, female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. See, if you're a brother, you end up rich. But if you're a husband, you'll end up poor. Okay? So let's head back down here. Verses, is that 14 through 15? Yep, 14 through 16. Verses 14 through 16. Abram's plan works out, right? Or at least it seems to. And then we get up to verse 17. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases by the word. This word is the same word for plagues. So this story is looking ahead. So the Egyptians are under some plagues because of the Israelites, which is just Abraham and his wife at this point, on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So like as soon as Sarai steps in, disease, plague comes upon Pharaoh dramatically, and they know that Sarai is the cause because it happens when she comes in. So, they ask, what's going on here? And Pharaoh summons Abram. What have you done to me? He said, why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her to be my wife? Now, here is your wife. Take her and go, right? And what's just funny is that the plagues are enough for this Pharaoh to say go, but in the future, right, it won't work out that way. Anyways, then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So the kind of the peak of this is verse 17 with the plagues, and then the kind of the falling action is 18 and 19, and where they get to go. And we could ask ourselves what lessons come out of this. Well, the first one is that not everything is perfect in the promised land. That's what we see with the famine, right? Then in verse 11, we see fear show up. And we see in verses 12 through 16 how our fear can lead to lack of trust. Abram does not trust in God, and instead he plots and he does those sorts of things. Now, if the plague is indeed the pinnacle of the action, it's hard to see how plagues play into this. We could say that perhaps God is teaching us to trust Him, right? That's one lesson. But I think even beyond that, remember that Sarai has been, that Abram's been promised a child. Well, let's say that Sarai goes into the household of Pharaoh and gets pregnant or something like that. Because the promised child is supposed to eventually come through Sarai's womb, does this put the promise in jeopardy? Jeopardy. I forgot how to spell jeopardy. Oops, sorry. But anyways, the plagues is God's way of telling us to trust in Him, but it's also God's way of saying, I'm going to make my plans come to fruition. I'm going to make sure that my blessing takes place, and I'm not going to let the credit go to Pharaoh, let's say. And then verses in 18 and 19, Abram's blessed despite his fear. And we remember that when God said, I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, we see that that God is fulfilling His end of the bargain, even if Abram was deceptive in the way that came about. So we see God's grace upon Abram, even though Abram is being deceptive here. So all those lessons kind of come out in the first one, and then it ends with him going back to the Negev. He returns to where this story began, which is in a lot of ways why they're connected. But things again aren't all good. So Abraham went up from the Negev with his wife and everything they had. This should be 13:1. Sorry. With everything, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. So Lot has been there this whole time. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. Right? When the Egyptians left, he kind of plundered them. From the Negev, he went from place to place. So he's a sojourner again, right? He's traveling about until he came to Bethel, the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier and where he had built his first altar. So his path has brought him kind of back to a starting point, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So he just stopped to worship at the altar in which he had worshipped God again before. So if we were to go down to this, we have kind of a restoration here. Verses 1 through 4. Abram in Canaan worshiping God. Right? So the story starts out with kind of everything's come back to normal, but there's a height difference here because there's been some progress in Abram's life, right? Verse 5, now Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together. So how much does they have? Their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. Abram has been massively blessed by God, lots of possessions, but doesn't have an earthly home, right? So we don't have to think of possession as something that we can't have in our temporary lives here on earth. But even with great possessions, we still have our identity firmly planted in heaven. So anyways, Lot is with him, and the land can no longer support the two of them. Now, remember that he's already lost his father, Terah, right, in this journey. And we know that what's about to happen next is he's going to lose his, almost son, Lot. Quarreling arose between Abram's herds and Lot. Now, this word quarreling is like bitter fighting. So there is deep-seated hate. There is physical confrontation. It will evolve into murder and worse between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So we get the inhabitants here, and this is going to be important in a little bit for just sinful people. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me or our companies, between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the left. If you go to the right, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Okay, so here we go. 5 to 9. Here we go. Tension begins to build, right? This is 5 through 7. Great wealth has led to more problems, right? More money, more problems. And then next, verses 8 through 9, Abram gives Lot the choice of the best land, right? What this shows us is that more wealth isn't always a blessing. And then B, what this tells us is that Abram has learned generosity and trust. He gives Lot the choice of where to go. God has blessed him, and he's like, I think God can do it again. There's a lot of faith and a lot of generosity in Abram here in verses 8 and 9. It shows just how much he has grown. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord. So, like the land of Egypt. In the garden of the Lord, we're talking about Eden, which is in between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Land of Egypt, we're talking about the Nile River Delta. And these are two lush growing regions, and that this area was well watered like those places. And then we get this little editorial note. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east, and the two men parted company. That's a rough spot. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and sinning greatly against the Lord. So let's come back down, and we'll go verse 10 through 13. And here, Lot separates and takes the good land. Sometimes we, say like, okay, I'll let you pick first, hoping that they won't pick the good stuff, and Lot totally picked the good stuff, right? So generosity in this instance doesn't necessarily lead to great blessing, although in the end we'll see that God is protecting Abram because Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. We'll see that in the next couple of chapters. And here's the pinnacle of the story right here. The Lord said to Abram after Lot parted with him, look around from where you are, to the north and to the south, to the east and to the west. All the land that you see I'll give to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. Right? And so this is the mountaintop moment for him. God renews and expands the promise. Yeah. Before, offspring had been singular. That's, I will give this land to your offspring forever. And then it becomes plural. I'll make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if your offspring could be counted, they can't. So the Lord says to Abraham after Lot, look around you. Go look to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. It's all yours. I'm going to give this to your offspring forever. God's like watching Abram and Lot's interactions. He's watching the whole thing. And when Abram does what pleases him, instead of getting, wealth from the Egyptians or something like that, instead it is God who makes the promise. And what a great place to be. He tells him, go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. It's the only command so far that we've seen for Abram in the promised land is go and walk, right? Which is to be this encouraging thing for him. So that's verses 14 through 17. And then kind of the falling action. So he pitches his tent in the trees of Mamre at Hebron, which is, by the way, another. My pen's not working. The trees of Mamre at Hebron is another healthy place. Lots of green here. Great place for shepherding. And there he builds another altar to the Lord and he worships. And in that way, we are kind of returning to this theme of worship. And that's what was happening in verse 9, actually, before the famine, was worship. So each saga of Abram's life leads to more worship, and each worship is higher and greater than the next because of the trials that he has come through. So that is these two stories put together. They show us that, you get into the promised land and you think everything's going to go well, and it doesn't. We go through all sorts of trials, all sorts of difficulties. And we can either trust in ourselves, which is what happens with the story of Lot, or we can trust in God. And obviously we want to trust in God.